Amen.
Now, Sir Norman Laurista, ABI's Social Studies Coordinator, will now introduce our resource person for this afternoon's online symposium.
Isang makasaysayan at mapagpalayang hapon sa lahat. Ang ating tagapagsalita ay nagtuturo ng kasaysayan sa De La Salle University at Broadcast Communication sa University of the Philippines, Diliman. Siya rin ang PRO ng Philippine Historical Association. Nagtapos ng BA at MA kasaysayan at kandidato o magtatapos ng PhD sa Antropolohiya sa UP Diliman. Ang kanyang masterado ukol sa mga programa ni Imelda Marcos, ukol sa Metro Manila, ay ililimbag sa Malaon bilang Cuteness and Power. Siya ang sumulat ng malaganap na papel sa internet na torture human rights violations during the Marcos regime. Kasamang nagsulat ng aklat na Bonifacio, ang unang pangulo at ng Bayani biography. Naglathala na rin sa iba't ibang artikulo sa mga journal na akademiko. Naging original na panelista ng The Bottom Line with Boy Abunda ng ABS-CBN at consultant ng History with Lord ng TV5 at ng mga telesering Katipunan at Ilustrado ng GMA7. Lumikha ng Xiao Time television segment na ngayon ay isang column sa Abante tuwing linggo. Nagsusulat din ng column sa The Manila Times tuwing Sabado. Siya ang isa sa pinakaaktibong public historian sa telebisyon sa bansa. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Professor Michael Charleston Xiao Chua.
Makasaysayang hapon po sa ating lahat at maligayang araw ng kapangyarihang bayan. Happy People Power Day sa ating lahat. Sana ako natutuwa na hanggang ngayon tuwang-tuwa pa rin kayo na binabati kayo niyan sapagkat a lot of people are saying EDSA is our greatest mistake. Well, may pinagmumulan ng opinion na yan. We should not cancel why they are saying that. To cancel it is we will just cancel each other. In recognizing that there is a legitimacy in such a feeling because the democracy that was restored, ang demokrasya na ibinalik natin dahil sa ating kapangyarihan ay after EDSA Revolution, ilan sa ating mga leader ay inagaw ang mga pakinabang ng demokrasya, ng human rights, ng justice system, at ito ay ginamit sa kanilang sariling pakinabang. Kaya may mga ganyang feeling. Huwag natin silang sisihin. Ang kailangan natin gawin, matuto tayo sa kasaysayan. Matuto tayo sa nangyari. Na may mga panahon na talagang yung mahirap makuha yung hustisya na yan. Na tayo ay nasa ilalim ng isang diktadura. Nagkaroon na tayo ng pagkakataon na talakayin yan sa aking unang lektura dito sa Ateneo de Iloilo, Santa Maria Catholic School. In fact, ito na po yung kumbaga, itong video na ibinigay ko o itong lecture na ibinigay ko dito, ang aking official video sa aking YouTube ng aking lektura ukol sa martial law. Ngayon, yan din ang balak kong gawin. Hihingin ko sa inyo ang video na ito dahil gusto ko naman talakayin yung katuloy ng kwento na yan. Paano ba tayo lumaban sa diktadura? Kailangan liwanagin din natin. Maraming nagsasabi, lahat naman ng mga lumaban kay Marcos, mga komunista lahat. Mga komunista lahat yung mga yun. At dahil mga kalaban naman sila ng gobyerno, kailangan puksain sila. Kailangan puksain. Kaya nararapat lamang yung mga nangyari noon na paghigpit. Ay kung titingnan po natin, dito natin malalaman na malawakan po yun. Maraming sektor, maraming klase ng tao. Hindi lang komunista, hindi lang left, hindi lang pula. Bagamat malaki ang kanilang papel sa pagbagsak ni Pangulong Marcos. Kinikilala natin yun. Pero hindi lang sila yun. Napakaraming iba-ibang tao. Sa aking lektura ngayon, titignan natin, hindi lang yung mga main players, Cory Aquino, Enrile, Ramos, yung tinatawag nating EDSA heroes. Tignan natin yung mga iba pa na may malaking papel. May mga higit sa 200 larawan ang ating titignan. Sapagkat sa mga larawan na ito, mas mangungusap pa kesa sa ako'y papakinggan yung mag-lecture. At dito natin makikita na ang EDSA revolution ay hindi talaga totally peaceful. Ang 4 na araw lamang ang peaceful. Akala kasi natin, EDSA revolution was a peaceful revolution. Kinakala natin, okay lang, sige. Uupo na lang ako pagkatapos ng EDSA revolution. Pag nawala yung kalayaan ko sa akin, magparty lang ako sa EDSA, ay babalik na yung kalayaan na yun. Hindi po. No. Mali ka dyan, kapatid. Mali. Because EDSA, people power, was not a picnic. Hindi po ito picnic. The climax of 4 days was the peaceful revolution. Peaceful revolt. I call it the EDSA revolt. But the whole revolution was 14 years since the declaration of martial law, and it was bloody. At napakahirap na nangyari. So this lecture will focus on what I call the endgame. In many ways, it was a game of these personalities. Sabihin natin yung game na yan, naipit ang tao o kasama ang tao. However way you think of it. Pero player ang tao. Player ang mamamayang Pilipino. People are saying, military lang ang naging crucial dahil sa EDSA. Simbahan lang ang naging crucial. Cory Aquino lang ang crucial. No, everyone was crucial. Everyone, the church, the military, the people are all there. Yan po ang pag-uusapan natin ngayong hapon na ito. So, muli po, magpapasalamat ako sa ikalawang pagkakataon na ako'y maanyayahan ng Ateneo de Iloilo Santa Maria Catholic School. Please follow my YouTube and follow me in social media. At may website ko po baka makatulong din po sa inyo, lalo na sa mga mahilig sa kasaysayan at nagtuturo ng kasaysayan. xiaochua.net, bangkanixiao.wordpress.com. Yan po ay, yung Bangkani Xiao ay mga readings ko po sa klase. Gusto ko rin kilalanin ang aking mabuting kaibigan na alumna pala ng inyong eskwelahan. Siya po ay nagtatag ng Puntani Studios na siyang na merong magazine din na ginagawa. Batang-bata, no? Si Binibining Angelina Nakaya. Ay naging alumna ng inyong eskwelahan. Siya ay matalik kong kaibigan. At ito yung post niya kahapon na kanina pa lang umaga to na aking quote, no? I-follow nyo rin sana yung Puntani kasi yan ay galing sa inyong alumna. Salamat, Angelina. I-google po natin para sa mas marami pang impormasyon. Torture, yan po yung human rights violations paper ko na nasa internet. Gayun din ang Haring Bayan People Power Xiao Chua. Google nyo yan para makita nyo yung aking Haring Bayan Democracy and People Power in the Philippines, para may notes din kayo kung sino yung mga lumaban na babanggitin ko. Pero marami pa to. Actually, this is the second time I will give this lecture today. Kanina may nauna pa. Pero iba ito dun sa dineliver ko last year. Mas marami hong litrato. And I would like to give tribute again also to my professor, Dr. Dante Ambrosio, who died in 2011. He was a freedom fighter, and he left me with a lot of pictures. And makikita nyo yung credit sa kanya sa mga larawang ito. The pictures will make us remember what happened during those times. Kasi as time goes by, sumisimple yung narrative. Of course, it's more complicated than how I will tell it to you. But in the span of 1 hour and a half, perhaps, we will have an idea what happened. Okay, based on these photos. Okay, magsimula po tayo. In this Ralph Cohen portrait, you will see how the Marcoses saw themselves as someone who will rule the country as a dynasty. By the coming of the 1980s, Marcos wins a third term in an election, and in the inauguration, he took his oath of office, and then after that, the choir thundered the Handel's Messiah. And then during the part where it says, and he shall reign forever and ever, and he shall reign. Sabi lang, ano yung he shall reign forever and ever? Hindi si Jesus. Baka si Makoy. Imelda was already the leader or the head of what we call the executive committee. That executive committee is tasked to take over from Marcos in the event that he dies. And there was one time in 1983 that he said he's going to take a vacation. Well, in fact, he was hospitalized for his liver, for his kidney problem. They replaced his kidneys, and there was a rejection of the kidney. And so, there was a real situation here that Marcos was already dying. The economy was, shall we say, had a big problem because of the oil shock crisis and all other matters. The foreign debt was so high. Ito yung pinakamataas na foreign debt natin in history. Ito. And our GDP went down in 1983. The lowest ever since World War II. At hindi pa rin niya napapantayan yung kababaan niya ever since. So, tumataas ang presyo ng bilihin. There was a recession. The human rights violation problem was there. Of course, you have cronyism. Cronyism. Saan yung cronyism? Yan, cronyism. You have hidden wealth na tinatawag natin, na natalakay natin last time. But you see here the $1.4 million for jewelry in one day receipt from Imelda Marcos. So imagine niyo yun, ano? How do you explain the wealth? Supposedly 10 billion ang nawala sa atin, no? Marcos and his cronies. Yung ano dyan. And we have recovered 4 billion already, and Switzerland returned 685 million because they deposited in Swiss banks. There were, of course, human rights violations, tortures, disappearances, and sometimes political murders. They executed a lot of the people that they killed were the very young. They were supposed to be the president now of the country, or the senator, or the boss in the company. They were the future of the country. They loved the country. That's why they died. They died for their principles and their beliefs. But a lot of them died, not in the height of martial law, but after it was lifted. 1981. When Marcos lifted martial law, it was not real. The dictatorship continued, and the mere fact that people thought that martial law was over and people can go out in the streets and express themselves, there were killings that happened, more killings that happened. You will see that in the bantayog ng mga bayani. Yung marami sa mga namatay, 80s namatay. Parang sabi nga nila, kapag yung manok na si Panabong ay malapit ng mamatay, dun siya ganun ng ganun. So, naging uncontrollable yung human rights violations. Again, Marcos did not order everything, but he had a system kung saan ito ay lumaganap at pinabayaan. Impunity. Kumbaga. Because of the injustices of martial law, instead of stopping the communists from growing, as yun ang reason why martial law was declared, from less than 1,000 cadres in the mountain in 1972, according to some people, lumaki to 30,000, I mean. And even more, ang kasapian ng New People's Army, the armed rebellion of the Communist Party. And because of this, the Americans said that Marcos became the number one recruiter of the NPA. Because the more repression that happens, the more are people drawn to communism. Do you want communism to stop? Then stop oppression. Oh? Yun ang nangyayari dito. And so lumaki sila. And there, of course, there's an armed rebellion of the Moro National Liberation Front by Nur Miswari and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. But not everyone wanted to overthrow violently the government. Some wanted to go inside the system and challenge it legally. And kinikilala natin some of the people who were part of the human rights lawyers who defended those who cannot defend themselves during the time of the military dictatorship. Pinili nilang maglingkod kesa yumaman maging corporate lawyer, naging human rights lawyers, including from Cagayan de Oro, Aquilino Pimentel, who was a social democrat. So, hindi lang yung radical left, kundi even the middle left, no, kumbaga the center left, like myself, were also part of the struggle. Senator Jose W. Diokno, who was a senator with Ninoy Aquino, became a human rights lawyer after he was imprisoned. Lorenzo Tañada, the longest-serving senator of the country, became a human rights lawyer, the grand old man of the Senate. Oh? Senator Jovito Salonga as well, Attorney Jovito Salonga, and they created, under Senator Diokno, the Free Legal Assistance Group, the FLAG, and eventually the Mabini. Joker Arroyo was also part of that. So, these people defended the Lumads in Ifugao, in Kalinga, for example, those who were imprisoned in the military camps. See, Justice J.B.L. Reyes, of course, was also part of those who defended the poor and the marginalized and those who were oppressed. As I said, Marcos was sick already. They said he had lupus erythematosus, which is basically failure of the organs, especially the kidney, which is manifested with sa skin yan. Nagsusugat-sugat yung kanyang skin. So you see him bandaged in fingers niya and all of that. The problem was, because he was sick, people are expecting him to die. And in Malacanang, there are power cores. Ibig sabihin, may mga naglalaban na mga division already. There were ones where the Ilocanos, they were called now the Ilocanos, or the pro-Marcos, and the Warais, which were the pro-Imelda. Yung magaling tumawid sa dalawang yan ay si General Fabian Ver, itong nandito sa kanan. Fabian Ver was Marcos's military driver, who he promoted to become eventually the head of all the intelligence agencies, which basically they implemented the human rights violations against the victims. And also, he eventually became the chief of staff by 1981, I think, of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, bypassing West Point graduate and Marcos' cousin, Fidel Valdez Ramos, who was relegated to vice chief of staff and the chief of the Philippine Constabulary, who, the Philippine Constabulary, were also perpetrators of the human rights violations. So, ang nangyari dyan, si General Ver was being promoted, nagkakaroon ng resentment kay Fidel Ramos in many ways. Because he believes na talagang decorated soldier yan si Ramos He was a Korean war hero. He was a very fine general, kumbaga, and he deserves to be chief of staff. Pero naunahan pa siya nitong nag-aral sa UP ROTC. They were not PMA. So yung ROE ng ROTC PMA nandun. Isa sa mga naiinis kay General Ver ay yung defense minister who used to be the powerful during the time of Marcos. He implemented martial law with Marcos, Juan Ponce Enrile. But by the time that Marcos was becoming sick, Imelda and Ver were becoming powerful. And he believes that eventually, Enrile, he is going to be eliminated. So, because of this, so tingnan nyo, hindi lang ito simpleng pro-Marcos, anti-Marcos. There were internal, kumbaga napakasalimuot nito. This is where you see how everything will fall into place by 1986. Na lahat ng ito actually ng puwersa nag-aaway. Yung Social Democrats, tatampo sila sa National Democrats. Alam niyo yun, yung mga left and the center left and the radical left were not we're not talking to each other, na ganun-ganon, ay magkakasama-sama tong mga to. Oh? So si Enrile started to recruit some men, some young colonels, including Gregorio Gringo Onasan, very, very handsome. And that's why he became famous during the EDSA Revolution. Attorney Red Capunan and all of them. Jose Almonte, who was advisor to eventually to President Fidel Ramos. These people will become what we call the Reform the Armed Forces Movement. So magtitrain sila, maghahanda sila, na eventually, if Enrile will become endangered, they are going to defend him. It became his security force against Ver. So, matindi to, mga kaibigan. Ano? Now, even in the party of the president, kilusang bagong lipunan, the Prime Minister, Cesar Birata, who was a great economist, and Birata was so favored in the world. Sa buong mundo, kilala si Birata na malinis. At dahil sa kanya, nakakautang yung gobyerno Marcos dahil sa malakas yung kanyang kredibilidad. Now, eventually, dahil sa spending ni Imelda, even Virata said, hindi ko napopondohan yung film center na yan. Napahiya si Imelda. And so, in one of the party conferences of KBL, they humiliated Prime Minister Virata. Remember that at that time, we were presidential parliamentary because of the 1973 Constitution. So Marcos was first president and prime minister, and eventually Virata became prime minister and Marcos was president. Virata wanted to resign because of that humiliating conference, but Marcos said, kailangan kita dito. I cannot let you leave. And so he did not leave. Eventually, Prime Minister Virata will be the one who's going to lead the transition. Ibig sabihin, from the Marcos dictatorship, siya na lang yung naiwan eh. Lahat sila nag-alisan after eh. So siya yung parang nag-transition ng gobyerno to Cory Aquino. And of course, he's still very much respected up to now. Cesar Enrique Aguinaldo Virata. People were fighting for press freedom. Remember that at that time, there was censorship of the official media. Yung Diario, under sila sa National Media Production Center na pinamumunahan ni Gregorio Sendanya. At sinecheck lahat ng balita. But eventually, nagluwag. So yung pagluluwag, sabi ko nga sa inyo, nagkaroon ng parang semblance that there can be opposition. But of course, the problem was, pwede kang arrestin, pwede kang patayin. And that was the problem. And so, nag-mushroom yung tinatawag na mosquito press. The mosquito press, the Marcos regime called them mosquito press. No? Kasi para silang panggulo. Langaw. Lamok. No? Pero, sila yung nagsasabi ng katotohanan at that time. So, yung Malaya, We Forum, Mr. and Mrs. Special Edition eventually. And the church has a very powerful contribution in the struggle against Marcos because people like Sister Mary Jan Manansan and Sister Mariani Di Maranan, si Sister Mariani protected the detainees. Sila yung nagtatag ng Task Force Detainees of the Philippines and all of that. No? Association of the Religious Superiors in the Philippines also helped in the struggle. So, silent march for the voiceless, defenseless, and neglected in our society. They even have their own mosquito press in many, many ways. Even before the mosquito press came out, the church was already saying or telling what the truth. So sila yung parang naging journalists, there's Signs of the Times, and all of that. By 1983, Ninoy heard that Marcos was dying, and so he wanted to go home, talk to Marcos for a transition to democracy. He thought that he can talk to Marcos because they were brads from the Upsilon Sigma Pi of UP. And yun yung problem. He wanted sana, kasi 1984 elections will come, and Marcos and Ninoy wanted to unite the opposition against Marcos so that there would be more delegates in the Batasang Pambansa 1984 elections. Ang opposition. But Marcos did not want Ninoy to go home, according to some people, because Reagan President Reagan will visit later in 1983, later in the year. The problem is, of course, hindi na natuloy yun because of what eventually happened. But at noontime, Ninoy Aquino, who prepared a statement saying he wanted to go back to the Philippines after a three-year exile, kaya nga naglagay sila ng yellow ribbon kasi yung kanta ng ano nun, Tony Orlando, no? Oh, tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree. It's been 3 long years. Do you still want me? Oh? So they tied the yellow ribbon. August 21 was when the Ninoy Aquino supporters headed by Eva Calao and I think Puyat, one of the Puyats, tied yellow ribbon around. But Ninoy did not see those yellow ribbons. He was killed on the stairs at the tarmac of the Manila International Airport. I know you're students, so just close your eyes if you do not want to see violence, but Doña Aurora Aquino, when he saw the body of Ninoy, said, "Do not clean him. I wanted them to see what they did to my son." Millions of people filed past, or hundreds of thousands of people filed past the coffin of Ninoy in the 11 days in August, from August 21, I think, to August 30 or 31, I forgot. End of August, nagkaroon ng mga funerals sa Tarlac, dito sa amin, sa Tarlac City ako, and na Concepcion, and in Manila, Santo Domingo Church. And in the funeral itself of Ninoy, after 10 days, 2 million people came. This is the first, remember that I told you already that the left was already demonstrating. But when Ninoy died, 2 million people came. 2 million people. And the newspapers did not report this. That's why Eugenio Apostol of the Lifestyle Mr. and Miss magazine created the Mr. and Mrs. Special Edition to show people that so many people went to Ninoy's funeral because the government refused to tell. The television and all of that, and the newspapers. So eventually, because of the magnitude of Ninoy's martyrdom and the international press that it got, it became big news. And Ninoy Aquino's sacrifice was likened to the sacrifice of Rizal. Who willingly sacrificed their lives because they wanted to bring back freedom and democracy. So, of course, all sorts of things now are interpreted. That Ninoy's struggle was also like Jesus Christ suffering. Diba? To give up your life for a friend is the greatest love of all, according to St. John, right? And so now it will turn to become the medieval morality play, as they said. The battle of good versus evil. Diba? Di Marcos being the bad guy, and Ninoy Aquino and his supporters being the good guys. So, but a lot of the progressive groups were saying, it's not just about Ninoy. And in many ways, this is still a reminder for us. Ninoy was not only the hero of martial law. There were many people who became heroes and they were killed. And we talk about them in the last lecture that we have had with you. So the call now is justice for Aquino, justice for all, Jaja. And this became a group that united different sectors and different groups that eventually united and became a group called the Jaja, which also wanted justice for men and women who were killed by the dictatorship. Now, eventually, what happened was, after the funeral of Ninoy, people thought that Marcos will fall. But he did not. He did not fall. He was strong. He was not even weakened by it. But do you know what happened? The floodgates, opened. Meaning, when people saw that they can gather around and make rallies, people started to come out almost every day from 1983 to 1985. They even make fun, Filipino humor, because, Ninoy was shot in the stairs, but the government is insisting that Ninoy was shot by Galman down the stairs on the tarmac itself. But it doesn't count. The trajectory of the bullet doesn't make sense if that's the case. And so they even make jokes about that, the way that the bullet was shot. So parang ito, the Japanese media was saying, this is how to shoot Ninoy from behind, if the trajectory. So sabi lang, bading daw yung, kasi sabi, bang! Bang! Sabi. Napaka-sexist nung joke. But yeah, at that time, bading daw yung bumaril kay Ninoy. Mga ganon, no? And yeah, people started to, make fun of what was happening. Oh, di ba? E.T. Uso nun yung pelikulang E.T. Spielberg yata yun. Ano? Ito naman, Exterminate Totally. Directed by Fabian Verdugo. FM Production presents, di ba? Perdi, Meldi. Oh, in E.T. Shot on location at the Manila International Airport. Well, Rolly Galman, ayan, introducing, who is Rolly Galman? Rolly Galman fell with Ninoy in that murder. Because the soldiers said they killed the one who shot Ninoy. He was the fall guy. And you know how he was identified? He was identified because there was Rolly na nakaburda sa kanyang brief. Kaya people also talked about that and they laughed about it and said, Rolly Galman, a brief encounter with history. So, people are, being creative here. Nagiging creative sila, no? Papatawa. Now, when Ninoy was killed, people thought he did not die. Because in the airport, on August 21, this guy came out and he looked like Ninoy. Remember, this is Ninoy's brother, Agapito Boots Aquino. B-U-T-Z, Boots. Okay? So Boots Aquino eventually organized other groups and that group became the ATOM, A-T-O-M, August 21 movement. Okay? So eventually, what will happen is the Tarlac to Tarmac March will happen a few months after Ninoy was murdered. And the Tarlac to Tarmac was it lasted for a few days from Concepcion Tarlac, Ninoy's birthplace. And they marched to Manila and they stopped in churches. So they slept in different towns in churches. And then eventually, ang dami niyan, so many people went to that march, but they were stopped in Magallanes Interchange after a few days. And in Magallanes, only 21 people proceeded to the airport to go to the tarmac. And represented, August 21, they represent yung 21 people went to the tarmac of the Manila International Airport on the very site where Ninoy Aquino was killed. So the middle class eventually, kasi dapat sabi ko the left were there, but eventually the middle class joined the protests. And the first year of Ninoy's death, August 21, 1984, was a big rally in Makati. So ayan, sabi niya, katok-katok, sino yan? Tomas. Sinong Tomas? Tomas na naman ang mga presyo. So it reflected, the humor reflected the times. My good friend Susan Kimpo is here pictured performing because I'm showing you that it's not just, the revolution is not just fought with guns. It is also fought with brains and talents and, artistry. People were, having performances here and there. Patatag, I think, is a group of performers among the activists. They were talking about, alam mo yun, they were singing songs about women. Diba? Ano yun? Mga babae, ang mithin ay lumaya. Diba? Bakit ba mayroong mga Lisa, mga Liliosa at mga Lorena na di natakot, makibaka, at ngayon marami ang kasama. So these things. No? And different sectors. Again, I will show you the different sectors na nagrally. No? Dante Ambrosio, my teacher, inisa-isa niya yung iba't ibang evolution ng mga groups. No? Actually, marami pa yan. Yan lang yung mga alliances. You have, sabi ko nga, yung Jaja by 1983, and then the Compil, Kongreso ng Mamamayang Pilipino, I will show you later kung ano yan, and Welgang Bayan. And then 1985, Bayan was founded, the bagong alyansang Makabayan, which was headed by Lorenzo Tañada, which became the National Democratic, in many ways, the National Democratic Movement, even today. Diba? Yung Bayan muna ay galing dyan. And then, of course, by 1986, you have the snap elections. We will go there later. But the Muslims were part of the struggle. the Muslims, the doctors, sabi ng mga doktor, doktorin ng may karamdaman, hindi ang botohan. Sabi ng mga dentista, fight truth, decay. Dentist for truth, freedom, and justice. Sabi ng mga babae, Gabriela, pag hindi umalsa ang masa, walang tinapay sa mesa. O, di ba? At yung even the martial law victims' relatives, headed by Aurora Aquino herself, the mother of Ninoy, banded themselves together to form the Mothers and Relatives Against Tyranny, or MARTYR. MARTYR eventually will list down people who became victims of human rights violations. And eventually, that group will become the bantayog ng mga bayani. So sila yung magme-memorialize ng mga pangalan ng mga namatay nung panahon na iyon. So they started memorializing all those who died, even during the time of martial law. Oh? And eventually, as I told you, the Ayalas, Jaime Thobel, Fernando Thobel, Jaime Augusto Thobel, they became, what they call this, they did not like Marcos eventually. And they started to offer Ayala Avenue and the Ayala Center to become a space for protests. So, anong mangyayari dyan? So, doon na nagprotesta yung mga tao. There was a field called the Ugarte Field, somewhere near this place. Ito yung ito yung Ayala Avenue, corner Paseo de Rojas, di ba? Nandito yung Ninoy statue ngayon. Important yan sa laban. Daming rally na nangyari dyan. Pero yung stock exchange, there's a triangle space there where the stock exchange is now. Puro building yan ngayon. But before, it was a huge triangle called the Ugarte Field. So, sa Ugarte Field, doon nagpupunta yung mga aktivista. At anong ginagawa sa kanila pag nag-rally sila doon? Pinapaulanan sila ng confetti. Ito hindi na naiintindihan ng mga bata ito, no? Anong panahon noon, walang phone book sa telepono. Wala, telepono mo, ginagano, ring, 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 isa-isa yung number. Tapos yung mga restaurants, yung mga tao hinahanap mo sa phone book, ang tawag nila yellow pages kasi yellow. So yung yellow pages, ginugupit yon ng mga executive sa Makati, yung mga young urban professional doon. Tapos pag dumaan yung mga nagrarally, tinatapon nila yung confetti. Parang chinichira ka. Yung confetti, yellow na naman. So talagang nadikit na talaga na yellow talaga ang color nitong anti-Marcos movement. Si yellow pages eh. So nagkaroon ng confetti revolt sa Makati. And then yung mga spasyo tulad ng Welcome Rotonda, naging part ng protesta. Welcome Rotonda, Palma Hall ng UP, University of the Philippines, at ito. Saan dito? Nakikita natin dito, mga kaibigan, nandito na po tayo, nakikita po natin ito, Metropolitan Theater, mga kaibigan. So, pag Metropolitan Theater sa Manila, nasan ka malapit? Liwasang Bonifacio. So, naging espasyo yung Liwasang Bonifacio at yung tinatawag na Manila Post Office Building sa mga protestang ito. So, ayan, nakakatuwa ito. Ninoy, hindi ka nag-iisa. That was the slogan for the morning Ninoy. You are not alone. Sabi ni Marcos daw, sabi nila kay Marcos, nag-iisa ka na lang. Imelda, nakaisa ka. Galman, naisahan ka. So, all this creativity and humor. No? Wanted dead or alive daw si Imelda. No? And then, of course, you have the political, as I said, the political prisoners who, ayusin ko lang to. So you have the political prisoners who were, shall we say, kalimutan ko na. Ayan. Okay. Oops. I just have to. Okay. So the political prisoners, they're kids, like the victims of human rights violations. They also banded together. They protested the human rights violations and the illegal detention. Kasi yung alam nyo, nung panahon noon, this is so that we will be taught about rights here. Today in the Constitution, you're supposed to, if you're arrested, you have to ask for warrant of arrest unless it is a citizen's arrest, where you're caught en flagrante delicto doing a crime. Okay? So that's when you are arrested, no? That's the time when you get arrested. Pwede kang arestoin ng walang warrant. Pero habang ikaw ay, kumbaga, ikaw ay isang tao na, hindi ka naman gumawa agad ng krimen, o I mean, hindi ka gumagawa ng krimen, inaaresto ka, you have to ask for warrant of arrest. But some of these political detainees did not have warrant. So, ibig sabihin yun yung an arbitrary arrest sa tawag. So, ganoon dati kasi kapag ka-rebellion, pwedeng gawin yun. No, kaya nga iniingatan natin na yung mga batas natin hindi maulit yun. Na pwede kang arestuhin ng walang warrant of arrest. So, free our detained parents. Nakakatuwa itong si Lino Broca, the film director. He said, don't resign. Kasi Marcos resigned daw. Sabi niya, don't resign. Just die. Funny. Anyway, pero mabigat yun. That was the wish of a lot of people. I did not want to wish him that, but that's the problem. Minsan you generate so much hate already. Now, this is a fantastic picture of human rights people who marched. And you see here different political persuasions already. So you have the left, you have the center left, the Social Democrats, you have the politicians, you have the elites, you have the matatanda, you have the socialera, you have the matrona there. Important people and ordinary people now together. Fighting. Now, of course, sa pag-rally nila, especially in Mindiola, where the presidential palace is located, barbed wire ang isinasagot dyan. Hindi lang barbed wire. Tear gas. Alam niyo yung tear gas? Hindi na alam niyo, hindi na kayo nagrarally eh. Yung tear gas yun, pagka yun ay pinasabog yun, parang pepper spray yun, masakit. Masakit na yung mata mo mahahapdi, tapos malalanghap mo yung usok. So ito, parang pandemic din. Meron din silang face mask. So nagkakaroon sila yan. Do it yourself, DIY, make your own tear gas mask. French style. So si Lino Broca yung sumubok dyan. Nakakatawa. So yan, arms link and face mask, priests and seminarians ready to be gassed. Kasi kapag rally ka nun, yan nangaabutin mo. Kaya sabi nung iba, hindi, bigas, hindi tear gas. Huwag ganun. And of course, you have here the human rights lawyers marching, braving the tear gas, what will happen to them. And hindi lang tear gas, bobombahin ka ng tubig, mga kaibigan. Pati mga babae, woman lawyers like Heidi Orak. Ayan, si Tanyada Diokno, si Frank Chavez, Joker Arroyo, these are people na hindi na kilala ng marami. Si Heidi Orak, ito, mga matitinding tao tong mga to. Tito Ginggona, who became Vice President of the Philippines, Wigberto Tanyada, who became Senator, son of Lorenzo Tanyada, the Grand Old Man of the Senate, now facing a force. Rene Sagisag, in one of the rallies in 1984, negotiating with the policemen. Pero hindi yun, hindi yun. Look, this guy is already very old. Was very old. Chino Roses, Manila Times editor, na sinaran ni Marcos. He was part of the opposition. Matanda na siya, hinarap pa rin niya yung mga pagbomba ng tubig. Alam niyo, pag binomba ka ng tubig ng ng bombero, iitsa ka sa lakas. Iitsa ka. So yun ang hinarap nila. Kaya nga magkakapit-bisig kayo noon. Magkakapit-bisig kayo. Basa-basa kayo. Pero hindi paliligo yan na enjoy, Talagang, mahirap yan. And tinirgas pa sila. So, binomba nga ng tubig, tinirgas pa 1984 sa Welcome Rotonda. So, kailangan dalhin si Tanyada, lagyan ng oxygen dahil sa tear gas. Ang gagawin mo nun, kailangan may basa kang bimpo o tuwalya para kapag nag-tear gas, ilalagay mo sa mukha mo yun para hindi ka masyadong hindi mo malanghap. Ang problema, paalis na sila, pa-disperse na sila, nagpaputok ngayon ng mga baril. At na baril, ang isang batang-batang aktivista ng pangalan ay Fidel Nemenso, anak ng dean ng College of Arts and Letters, Arts and Sciences ng UP. Na si Francisco Nemenso. So si Fidel Nemenso, yun, muntik nang mamatay kasi halos lahat yung organs siya, tinamaan ng iisang bala na yun na lumusot sa kanya. The heart was missed by only 1 inch. 1 inch. Oh? Pero nabuhay si Fidel at eventually siya po yung magiging chancellor ng UP Diliman sa kasalukuyan. Oh? Now, so yeah, people would say it's fun, but no, it was not fun. It was really a life of struggle for your rights. To become free, to have democracy. Oh? Young leaders were part of this struggle, including the president of the UP Student Council, Alejandro. Oh? Sisikat talaga yan and he will become a respected youth leader. He will be succeeded eventually by Chito Gascon, who was a social democrat. So sinali yan, mga national democrats yan. Yung mga social democrats, mananalo eventually sa UP noong 1985. At sila yung mag-host kay Cory Aquino doon sa rally niya sa Palma Hall. So si Chito Gascon ay may grupo ito eh. Oh? At yung grupo niya ang magiging parang simbolo nila yung tambuli. Oh? Clarion call. Oh? Mga social democrats ito. And eventually it made the social democrats win in other universities. Oh? So malaki yung part ni Chito Gascon sa struggle na yan. He's now the chair of the Commission on Human Rights. Mukha lang siyang mistiso pero ano yan, aktivista yan. Ano? At makabayan. Siyempre hindi pa uhuli yung Ateneo. So the Ateneo Student Council went down from the hill because the hill yan yung kanilang Katipunan campus. Went down from the hill and they became part of the struggle against Marcos, the students of Ateneo. Oh? Now, the youth, the lawyers, the middle class, dagdag natin yung labor. The urban poor and the labor. Well, of course, Felix Berto Cabert Olalia is already sick and dying by 1983 and 84. I think he dies in 84. I forgot, no? Pero eventually, of course, he and Crispin Beltran were the leading lights of the labor movement. Yung mga manggagawa naman ito. No? So ilang beses silang nakulong. Pero nag-organize sila. November 27, 1983 sa Mindanao, nagkaroon ng Nationalist Trade Union Congress. No? But again, you get arrested. Even the artists of the labor movement, Bonnie Ilagan, the great writer and good friend of mine, Bonifacio Ilagan, the artists were part of the movement against Marcos. Oh? Ayan, no? So, kapag may mga nagigiit ng kanilang karapatan ng mga tao dahil nagwewelga sila, ay talagang violent and dispersal na ginagawa ng mga pulis at that time. So, yan yung problem dyan. And yung isa, this was taken by my good friend Susan Kimpo, who died last year, a great friend of mine. Ito yung barikada na ginawa ng mga Globe Steel Factory strikers, and parang people power. Sila ay kumbaga dumapa sa kalsada para harangin yung mga at sa sila pumupunta sila sa ilalim ng gulong para hindi umandar yung mga, kumbaga yung scabs kasi yan yung mga ipapasok sa loob ng tawag dito ng kumpanya, factory, para hindi maging valid yung strike. Kumbaga dahil walang work stoppage, tuloy-tuloy yung trabaho. Kasi kailangan kang mag-work stoppage para igiit sa management na ito yung karapatan natin. Okay? So yun po ang dahilan. So may mga just strikes po yan para sa mga manggagawa. At eventually, of course, pupunta yan doon sa Welgang Bayan against the nuclear power plant na inutang ni Marcos, one of his biggest one of his biggest debts. Kaso tinayo sa Bataan na malapit sa Mount Pinatubo. Di ba sumabog yung Mount Pinatubo after 5 years after EDSA? Sumabog ang Mount Pinatubo. So if natuloy yung nuclear power plant, it would have endangered us according to some experts. So yun, pero yun barikada laban sa plantang nuclear, ito po yung protesta na yan. Na naging madugo din, naging violent din yung pagsagot. Yeah. So may Welgang Bayan din for food and freedom, So you see here different sectors coming together. Puntahan natin yung mga babae. Diba? So, si Sister Mary Jan Manansan, nabanggit ko na kanina, si Sister Mariani Di Maranan ng uh, uh, ng Task Force Detainees of the Philippines. So, si Lady Nakpil Alejandro ay asawa ni Lian Alejandro, no? Sila yung mga lumaban din noon. Si Sister Christine Tan ng Gabriela, no? Napaka patriotic woman, lumaban din kay Pangulong Estrada nung EDSA 2. At yung dalawang beauty queen na feminista, si Delia Sancho at saka si Maita Gomez. Ayan, no? Gandang babae na sumama sa laban. Ang kaibigan nating si Karen Tanyada, na isang NGO worker ay kasama din sa mga na-detain at sa mga lumaban ng panahon ni Marcos. At gayon din ang mga babaeng journalist na tulad ni Marites Bitog na naririnig nyo hanggang ngayon, si Joanne Maglipon, ang kaibigan nating si Neni Santa Romana Cruz, Leti Magsanok na nagtatag eventually ng Inquirer kasama ni Mrs. Pangalan nito? Si Eugenia Duran Apostol ng Mr. and Miss, no? Mara Lanot, Pauline Sikam, at marami pang iba. So, they banded together also. And Inang Laya, who sang those patriotic songs and protest songs of the 80s. Diba? Base militar, armas na nuklear, ito'y kahibangan na dapat hadlangan. So, yan yun. Ano? Now, more women in the battle, in the struggle, no? Different groups. Madami akong grupong hindi nababanggit, so sana hindi po magtampo. Ayan, tingnan mo, mga militanteng labandera. No? Kita nyo, mga sinalolay kasama sa laban. Diba? Kababaihan, magkaisa, makiisa sa sambayanan. Lagutin ang tanikala ng pagkaalipin. Dahil sa dumadami yung babaeng protesters, nagiging yung mga nagdi-disperse sa kanila, babae na rin. Imaginein mo, no? Yun. So, no? And as I said, there were more killings. At yun, kapag pumatay pa sila ng mga rebelde nun, talagang ipapakita talaga nila, sasabihin lang, mga kalaban to ng gobyerno, ganitong nangyayari sa kanila. Papipilahin yung mga tao. Papipilahin yung mga tao. Si Father Tulio Pabali nga na matulungin sa mahirap, pinatay ng isang Marcos Vigilante Group na pangalan ay Tadtad. Si Manero yan priest killer, si Manero. Kinain nila yung utak ni Father Pabali. Oh? Sorry po for the disturbing images, pumikit na lang muna kayo. But ito yung realidad ng diktadura. No? Sa Negros, ang daming nangyaring massacre sa Negros. People are talking about, yung Luisita massacre, yung Mendiola massacre. Naku, mas marami pong massacre nung panahon sa mga probinsya. No? At yung Escalante massacre, 21 September 1985, kung di ako nagkakamali, nagrally lang yung mga tao. Pinagbabaril, ang daming patay. Escalante, kung di ako nagkakamali, sa Negros ito. Ang tindi na nangyayari sa Negros. Binangkrap yung sugar industry ng isang crony sa Negros, malapit to sa inyo, sa Iloilo. Dahil alam natin maraming sugar planters sa Iloilo at Negros. At pagka-bankrupt ng sugar industry, no, at yung repression na nangyari doon sa mga freedom fighters natin, ang daming nagutom. So nagkaroon ng yung Oxfam na isang grupong NGO na pumunta sa Negros. Si John Silva ang kumuha ng litratong yan, bahagi siya ng Oxfam noon. They fed hundreds of children in various stages of malnutrition. Si Joel Abong, na payat na bata, yung batang Negros na tinatawag, became the symbol of the poverty of the Marcos. That is by cronyism, by corruption, by repression. Siya yung naging symbolo. Joel Abong. Eventually, lahat ng grupong ito, halos ay magsasama doon sa tinatawag na COMPIL, Kongreso ng Mamamayang Pilipino. Magmi-meeting sila, paano ba natin, anong next step natin, ang lakas pa rin ni Marcos, hindi pa rin natin siya mag-iba, paano natin babaguhin ang lipunan, etc. etc. So, they were planning na, pag 1987 na, magko-election na ulit, sino tatakbo? There were 50 nominees that were floated by the Kongreso ng Mamamayang Pilipino. And you will see familiar names like the Rebel Priest Conrado Balueg, Crispin Beltran, labor leader, Cesar Climaco, the mayor of Zamboanga, Jose Concepcion, the businessman, owner of Condura, no? Renato Constantino, the nationalist historian, Randolph David, the sociology professor, Jose Jocno, the lawyer, Neptali Gonzalez, the politician, Chupisto Gingona, the politician as well, Eva Calao, the great woman statesman, Salvador Doy Laurel, Rashid Lukman, Pendatun Salipada from Mindanao, Diosdado Macapagal, Raul Manglapos, who was in the United States as part of the movement for the Free Philippines, Patisinor Miswari, Mitra, labor leader Horacio Morales, Saturo Campo, leader of the NDF, National Democratic Front, businessman Jaime Ongpin, Justice Cecilia Muñoz Palma, Vicente Paterno, who was former secretary under Marcos, Aquilino Pimentel, Chino Roses, I told you about him kanina, Senator Soc Rodrigo, Attorney Rene Sagisag, Rafael Salas of the United Nations, Obito Salonga, Cardinal Jaime Sin was being considered to be the next president by the Compil, because of his integrity at that time. Jose Maria Sison, who was imprisoned, the leader of the Communist Party, Emmanuel Soriano, Tamano, Mamintal Tamano, I think father ito ni Adel Tamano, and you have the Senator Lorenzo Tañada, Justice Tihanki, Father Edicio de la Torre, Ed de la Torre, and Enrique and Jaime Thobel. Imagine niyo yun. They are being considered. Pero sa dinamin ng binasa ko, sino yung wala? Wala yung Cory Aquino. It's always like that, ano? Kung sino yung pinagpipilian mo, yung mananalo, yun yung hindi kasama doon sa pinagpilian mo. Laging ganon. Laging ganon. So, these people were good people, great people, but, the presidency is not necessarily because you're great, you're good, you're a statesman. It's really, talagang ang presidency is talagang incidental eh. Incidental. Chino Roses said, why not the widow of Ninoy? But he had no experience and she's a woman. Come on. Bakit naman? She knows politics because her father and mother were politicians from Rizal, the Sumulongs of Rizal. Diba? Corazon, Juan ko Solsok Tarlac. Corazon Sumulong Juan ko siya eh. And then nag-asawa siya ng Aquino, one of the best politicians we ever had. No? So, can you please mute? Moderator? Yeah. Okay. So, yung Chino Roses said, Cory Aquino should run. Cory gave two insane conditions. Because Cory did not want to be president. It was Cory who said that I heard Ninoy say before he died that whoever will replace Marcos will have a hard time. I'm not going to be that girl, boy. And so he gave two insane. One is, if you can collect 1 million signatures, which of course she did not believe will happen. Number two, if Marcos will be crazy enough to declare a snap elections. All right, snap election, yeah. That will never happen. And what happened? Chino Roses was challenged and he gave more than 1 million signatures for Cory Aquino to run. Hindi na lang nangyayari yung snap elections. Yan ang mangyayari. By I think the 1985, there would be, alam nyo itong Mount Rushmore, di ba? Yung great presidents nakaukit sa bato. Gatson Borglum, gumawa niyan. Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, at saka si Lincoln. Ito yung nakakatuwa dyan. Nung bumagyo minsan, may scaffolding sa isang bundok sa Pugo, La Union. Na-wash out yung scaffolding at anong lumitaw. Bigla nilang nakita there was a giant bust of Ferdinand Marcos, which was not carved in stone, but was created in cement. You see the megalomania of this man. Or at least Imelda said she wanted that present. It was her present to Marcos. But the megalomania is so big to carve your face in the mountain. Imagine mo. Oh. If it still exists today, it could have been a visual testament for that megalomania. The problem was the NPA blew it up, I think in 2003 or 2002. So, hindi na natin nakikita yan ngayon. By 1985 December, the RAM were starting to publicize their activities. They're not afraid of Marcos anymore. They reformed the Armed Forces Movement of Gringo na sa. We belong to the Armed Forces Movement. Now, 1985 was important because it was the Marian year. This is the 2000th birthday of the mother of Jesus Christ, our Savior. So, in that Marian year, Father Patrick Peyton came to the Philippines. And Father Patrick Peyton, I think si Sir Herman, kilala pa niya yan, siya yung head ng international ministry na Family Rosary Crusade. The family that prays together stays together. Father Patrick Peyton. Now, Cardinal Sin made a speech at that time. We're saying, he consecrates the country to the Virgin Mary. And after he went home that night, he told this assistant, who is now Bishop Soc Villegas, something great will happen. Something great will happen. May darating daw. So in many ways at that time, you will see that a lot of people actually regarded Cardinal Sin as a prophet. Prophetic yung mission ni Cardinal Sin. And which is, of course, to still administer to Marcos because Marcos is still a Catholic under his archdiocese. And Imelda, so still cater to their spiritual needs, but resist them and tell them about human rights and the plight of the poor. Yan ang mission ni Cardinal Sin. Now, ano yung something big that will happen? President Reagan's friend, si Marcos was President Reagan's friend. Si Reagan, Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States at that time. Ronald Reagan, as Governor of California, opened the Cultural Center of the Philippines. So nagkakaroon ngayon ng friend ni Reagan si Marcos, but some people in the Pentagon and the State Department did not like Marcos. Like George Shultz, who's the Secretary of State. Kumbaga yun ang Foreign Affairs Secretary. So, anong nangyari? There were people who wanted Marcos to reform. Kasi ganito yan eh. The U.S. interest here in the Philippines is one, to continue the U.S. bases, and number two, so that the communists will not take over the Philippines. Parang Vietnam War eh. Cold War yan eh. Cold War pa rin yan eh. So, ang konteksto niyan, kailangan yung malaman na America did not want the Philippines to fall under the communists, so they have to support a dictator. Even though they are believed that in democracy. And they did not want the Philippines to fall to the communists. Kasi nga, parang sabi nga ng mga Amerikano, and sorry for my French, Marcos is a son of a bitch, but as long as he is our son of a bitch, at least he is our son of a bitch. So, yun yung attitude. But Marcos, of course, Marcos helped us failing. The Americans are seeing this. We might go into a situation where it's out of control. Imelda was president and all of that. So they did not want that to happen. And so they sent one of the friends of Reagan, Senator Paul Lacson, to Manila to talk to him to hold honest elections. So anong ginawa ni Marcos? Marcos appeared on television on November 3. midnight in the Philippines. Nobody was watching because it was an American show. He announced that snap elections is coming. I announced that I am ready to call a snap election, perhaps earlier than 8 months, perhaps so in 3 months or less than that. He announced it in American TV. It was an American election. It was really an election to please America. And so what happened? The natural person to challenge him was Doy Laurel. Because Doy Laurel he already won in a convention of his party Unido. Oh? The left don't want to have anything to do with it. Because they said, this is an American election, so boycott yung call nila. So while people are saying, the snap election is our pag-asa, the left called for boycott, the National Democrats. Now, Tanyada, the founder of Bayan, did not approve. So sabi nila, I'm sorry, I have to leave you. I have to support the snap elections. Now, you all know the investigation of Justice Corazon Juliano Agraba and the Commission about Ninoy Aquino's assassination, which proved a military conspiracy. Okay, ibig sabihin, Ninoy Aquino was shot on the stairs, not on the tarmac, by the soldiers who got him out to go out of the plane, who accompanied him. Sila yung pumatay. And they pinpointed the military conspiracy. Now, what happened was, mahabang usapan yan, let's cut it short. In the Sandigan Bayan, what happened was, na-absuelto yung military na-absuelto yung military, including the ones who shot Ninoy. And General Verus, in part of the case, were acquitted with Prospero Olivas and the other people. And so, what happened was, Cory was mad that General Ver was acquitted and was reinstated as chief of staff. And the soldiers were reinstated as well. And so, Cory said, now there's snap elections, now there's 3 million signatures, and they acquitted General Ver, then I think I should run. Ang problema doon, Cory runs, Doy Laurel runs, and there would be 2 candidates of the opposition. And they will never win against a Marcos machinery. And so Cardinal Sin have to talk to these 2 people and said, you should think of the country. Doy Laurel, step down, slide down to vice president. Cory will become the presidential candidate. Ayaw ni Doy. They have to be convinced. But eventually, Doy made a decision that he will not think of himself, but rather he will think of the good of the country. But he said he agreed on a power sharing agreement with Cory. After some time, Cory will step down as president and Doy will become president. Cory Aquino said there was no such promise. I do not know. I was not there. But whatever it was, Doy Laurel gave up and became the vice presidential candidate to Cory Aquino, the presidential candidate. So you have the United Opposition, PDP, People's Democratic Party, Laban, which is Ninoy's party. So it's Aquilino Pimentel's party, PDP, Ninoy Aquino's party, Laban, and Unido, Doy Laurel's party, PDP, Laban, Unido, the United Opposition against Marcos Tolentino. It was the showdown. Why did you open? Hello, Kali. Bye-bye. I will see you. So, yeah, it was a showdown of, victory sign. Marcos' sign was always the victory sign. And you have the Laban sign for Cory Aquino. The final showdown against the Aquino-Laurel tandem versus the Marcos-Tolentino tandem. Now, that election was bloody. So many volunteers died. NAMPREL volunteers. People who were counting the votes and ang daming patay. Ang daming mga campaigners ni Cory ang namatay at that time. So, Ayan po, no, nakikita ninyo. This is an actual photo of a ballot snatching of an armed person. Actual photo yan, ha? And goons who already have the ballots in the 1986 elections, who were photographed. They also killed, so Antique, the head of Aquino's campaign in Antique, former Governor Evelio Javier, who was mentioned in your prayer, of course, because he was an Atenean. Evelio Javier's funeral was held here in Manila, in Luzon, in Manila. And it was like, they rekindled Dinoy Aquino's funeral. And what happened? While counting the votes, and people said, Cory did not have a role in EDSA. She was in absent leader. Cory was in Cebu. I'm sorry, Sir Herman, for the French, but this is bullshit. Cory had a role in EDSA. Why? I will tell you. She did not just hide in the Carmelite convent in Cebu. That's not true. Remember that when they were counting the votes in PICC, the COMELEC tabulators, computer tabulators, walked out. One of them was the wife of Red Kapunan of Ram. But they felt na iniiba yung bilang nila dun sa inilalagay dun sa taas. And then one of the person got a second copy and then tinignan nila, naku, magkaiba yung nilalagay nila sa taas na bilang. Pinapanalo nila si Marcos. Dinadagdagan ng boto. So they walked out. The canvas was continued in Batasan, which was a Marcos-controlled parliament, basically, with some people in the opposition. What happened? Eto na. Marcos was declared the winner. Marcos Tolentino were declared winners in the 1986 snap elections officially. And Cory did not accept that. Sabi niya, hindi, I won. Because the NAMPREL count, which is the, the watchdog body, in Green Hills, LaSalle Green Hills, said Cory won. So, all these events, actually, it was the snap elections who will make these events happen. If the snap election, if Marcos really used his brain, he shouldn't have followed the Americans. But he wanted to prove himself to the Americans, so the snap elections happened. If the snap elections did not happen, he wouldn't have been ousted. Because this will make the events go fast. What happened? Okay. Cory said, I won the election, and let's have a boycott rally in the Luneta. In the Luneta. Now, what happens here was that Cory said, let's do it in the Luneta. The advisor said, no, let's not do it in the Luneta. My goodness. Let's do it in Plaza Miranda where it's more manageable. The crowd can be managed more. Kahit konti lang yung dumating, may tao. But Cory was remembering her last meeting de Avance. Actually, this was the picture of the last meeting de Avance. The last meeting de Avance was she drew a million crowd in the Luneta. A million. So Cory said, okay, if people will not come, we will stop. I did not win. Eh, ano nangyari? As the pictures will show you, they were denied the stage, by the way, in the Tagumpay ng Bayan rally to announce the boycott. But 1 million people came. And she announced, and please remember this, there would be a 10-day civil disobedience program like Gandhi. So for the regime to fall, this is what we're going to do. Boycott San Miguel products, boycott all the products that support Marcos, Coca-Cola, withdraw all your money in PNB, and all of this. Okay, don't shop in Rustans, because Rustans was owned by Rustica Tantoco, Blue Lady of Imelda. So stop drinking San Miguel beer. And after 10 days, we will have a massive strike, work stoppage, and paralysis of the society, on the inauguration of Marcos as president, February 25. So 10 days civil disobedience. Led by Cory. That was February 16 of 1986. Very clear ito. The boycott was happening. This is, I think this is in front of those stands. There were protests that were happening. Boycott crony operations. And at the high, at anong tawag doon? Yung peak hours, not so many people were shopping in those stands. Nakuna ng litrato. So the boycott was already becoming successful. If people power did not happen, the boycott would have happened still. The organized mass movement, and that would be, kumbaga, yun yung magiging crowning achievement. Cory Aquino, the Joan of Arc. Because she was leading the people in that protest. Now, there are some people who did not like her to run. I mean, to become president. So, of course, Marcos was one of them. After the work stoppage, on the first day of his fourth term as president, Marcos will declare martial law again. That operation was called Operation Everlasting. Oh my God, this is interesting. All of the opposition leaders will be rounded up and arrested without warrant. They will be brought in a plane to be exiled in Carvalho Island. And in the list, there were people in the list with asterisks. Those with asterisks will be thrown on board from the plane. That was Operation Everlasting. Martial law would have been declared again. And, you know, Enrile was already then activated the plan. A coup d'etat against Marcos. Coup d'etat, a military operation. So, hinanda na yung RAM, no? Naghanda na sila ng mga armas, magkakaroon ng coup d'etat, sasalakay ng palas, February 22, 1986, while all of this was happening. Now, what will happen would be that after the Marcos was neutralized and his family were neutralized in Malacanang, Enrile will declare a junta who will govern the country until a peaceful transition to power in the election. So Enrile will become head of that junta. He will become president. You get me? So he did not want Cory. Now what happened? In the United States, there's what we call the movement for a free Philippines. You see, napakalawak nito. In the United States, there's a movement for a free Philippines. And there were people, American politicians, who were supportive of us. Stephen Solars, congressman, is supportive of Filipinos. He was asking the American government to, to drop Marcos and restore human rights in the Philippines. Yung friend ni Reagan who went to Marcos, Paul Laxalt, is here pictured. And Richard Lugar, Senator Richard Lugar, who was part of the team who went to the Philippines to observe the elections, and they said it was fraudulent. Kasama nila si John Kerry. Kung kilala niyo yung Democrat John Kerry, no, na naging presidential candidate, kasama nila yon na nagsabi, we observed the elections and it was fraudulent. Madaya ang election. Cory Aquino is the winner. By those days, dumating sa Pilipinas yung troubleshooter ni Reagan na si Philip Habib. Diplomat yan. Philip Habib. Philip Habib talked to everyone who was part of it. Si Cardinal Sin, kinausap niya. So that's Ambassador Stephen Bosworth. This is Villegas, Bishop Sok Villegas. She talked to Cory. She also talked to Marcos. He also talked to Marcos. And Philip Habib wanted to assess the situation and to tell people, do not blow yourselves. We do not want the communists to win. And basically to keep the interest of America. But he wanted to assess for Reagan if what's happening in the Philippines. You know, I think he left February 21 and he felt that it's going to blow up. Nagmamadali siyang umalis. February 21. By February 22, the RAM people and really assigned guards to Roberto Ongpin, the Secretary of Trade, if I'm not mistaken, Bobby Ongpin. And what happened was, eto na, nahuli ngayon yung, kasi may nagchuchu. Someone told Marcos, and I think even the Americans nga were back-channeling, you know, because Enrile and Ram were telling the United States, the ambassador, and the ambassador is telling Marcos and all of this. So, nalaman ni Marcos yung plot, and he arrested the guards under Roberto Ongpin. And so that arrest prompted Enrile to say, you know, nahuli tayo. And they know they're going to be killed soon. Marcos will attack them, or arrest them at least. So what happened was he called General Ramos, and supposedly Ramos said yes immediately. Vanny Biernes is suspecting that maybe he was part of the plan all along. Cardinal Sin was already told beforehand that there would be a coup. Sabi lang ni Cardinal Sin, according to Jose Almonte, basta wag lang bloody ha. Don't make it too bloody. And this is it. This is it. Nag-bolt out. He announced it at, I think, 5 p.m. in the afternoon. Ramos and Enrile on February 22 announced that they're bolting out from the Marcos regime. And people did not believe them. Enrile said he cheated for Marcos 1 million votes in Cagayan. Ramos said, and the reason for my being here, ladies and gentlemen, is because the armed forces of the Philippines assist to be the real armed forces of the Philippines, which is supposed to be the defender of public safety and the enforcer of the law. And, you know, Enrile, although he was not a coward, of course he feared for his life, he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Of course, Marcos was, you know, smoking cigar and very, 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 very relaxed. But that was a tense moment. Enrile, Ramos, and Marcos called each other, or at least their camps called each other and said they had a truce. Huwag muna kayong umatak. Because actually, Marcos feared that they already have the firepower, which they did not have. They have a few guns, but they did not have so much. They have only about 200 people, 300 people in the camp on their side. So, but Marcos feared that they might attack the palace, and so they had the truce that they will not attack each other. If that night they attack each other, they would have been killed. It would have been a different turnout. But they had a truce. So what happened was, eventually, Boots Aquino called Radio Veritas and asked for people to go to Isitan in Cubao. And then the people came. And eventually, of course, Jaime Cardinal Sin called Radio Veritas and said, you know, we have these two friends, Enrile and Ramos. We must protect them. We must give them food and expressions of support. Those of you who wish to help, you do so. Wish to help. And so, people came. But there are not so many in EDSA in the night of the 22nd. Dumagsa sila 23. There are about 2 million people who came to EDSA in and out all those times in the 4 days. So, Cory was in Cebu at that time. She went to the Carmelite convent in Cebu after a speech to campaign for the boycott, the civil disobedience. And yun. Again, Cory returned to Manila and she appeared in the POEA building on February 24 in the People Power Revolution. So it was not true that she was not there. And people were shouting her name. That's the problem. And I really did not like that, of course, but people were shouting her name. Because she was leading the civil disobedience, the boycott. Kaya, tinatawag yung pangalan niya. So yes, the military have a huge role in the People Power Revolution. But the problem was, if people power did not happen, it was unexpected, they would have been killed. It was the people who saved them. People power was unexpected. It was a military operation that they operated on. But again, if it did not happen, if Enrique's coup did not happen and was not botched, then EDSA wouldn't have happened either. So you have to look at all of this as a jigsaw puzzle that came together. And each one helped and participated. So the people went in the barricades, long story. I will not give you all the details. But eventually support came, firepower came, helicopters came in support of the rebels. But Marcos was still strong, but it's just that the generals do not want to follow him in firing over the crowds and even killing fellow soldiers. That's a problem. Although there's one person, Tadyar, who had a dilemma. Because, of course, what happened was, he was ordered to crush the rebellion. Now, to crush only Enrile and Ramos, not the people. So disperse the people, roll the tanks on. When the people have gone, all hell breaks loose. But again, this is the weirdest revolution in the world. And people saw it via satellite. We were not the first quote-unquote peaceful revolution. It was the revolution in Portugal in the 70s. But there was no CNN at that time. So live via satellite, people saw how weird the Filipinos were in waging the revolution. They were smiling. Ramos was jumping when he heard the fake news that Marcos fled. People were giving food to each other. And there were so many kids. Ang daming bata, kababagbag sa dami ng bata. Gumulong ang mga, di ba? Kahit yung mga bata, kahit may tangkinan, nandyan pa rin yung mga bata. Nag-birthday party nga si Guido Santos sa EDSA. Binigyan siya ng pinakamalaking birthday party. Mami, anong mangyayari sa birthday ko? Huwag kang mag-alala, anak. Bibigyan ka namin ng pinakamalaking birthday party sa mundo. At nag-birthday party siya sa EDSA. This is Chino Roses passing the baton of freedom to the young person, to a youth. Sabi ng isang nanay, I am a mother fighting for my children. Then you have the two kids there. It's the most inclusive revolution. Pati mga PWD kasama. Gumulong ang mga tangke, gumulong din ang mga wheelchair. And nandiyan na yung mga tangke, dumadating si General Tadyar in order, crush the rebellion. Alam mo, napigilan lang siya ng mga nakaluhod na yung mga tao sa harapan niya. February 23 sa Ortigas Avenue, hapon. Mga lola, mga madre. At may humamang din ng tangke, hindi lang sa Ortigas, pati sa sa welcome, sa Delta to. Sa Delta, may mga hinamang din na tangke. Ito yung favorite ko na people power picture talaga eh. Kasi ito, kukunti lang sila eh, na humaharang sa tangke. Ang tawag ko dito, people power, mga best. #squad goals. Nakita nyo yan, diba? The religious were there, the nuns, the priests. Hindi mga baril lang dala-dala. Napaka-weirdo ng Pinoy. Mga crucifix, mga manawag, mga Fatima, Santo Niño, Lanabal, lahat na santo, Our Lady of Kayumanggi. Nilabas lahat na santo. It was a revolution guided by the voice of a cardinal of the church that has been helping the poor ever since. Of Protestants, Muslims, other religions who joined the fight in people power. The elites, the poor. And of course, the late Sister Ping Ping Ocarisa, who died a few weeks ago, was part of that as well. They led the praying of the Rosary with Sister Terry Burias. I think they're daughters of St. Paul. She's a good friend of mine, Sister Ping Ping. I visited her a few years back, and she told me her EDSA story. And it was not just Manila. People said, How do you have a revolution? It was just Manila. No. There were EDSA revolutions in Cebu, in Davao, in Iloilo, in Baguio. It was a national revolution. On the 25th of February, on the first day of Marcos's regime, fourth inauguration, Cory Aquino was sworn in Club Filipino as President of the Philippines. He swore not in the 1973 Constitution, but he swore to protect the fundamental laws. I, Corazon Cojuanco Aquino, do solemnly swear that I would faithfully and conscientiously fulfill my duties as President of the Philippines, preserve and defend its fundamental laws, execute its just laws. Nilagay sa oath niya yun. Do justice to every man and consecrate myself to the service of the nation, so help me God. Of course, eventually, through Cory Aquino, a new constitution will be made. First, the Freedom Constitution of 1986 to replace the 1973 pro-Marcos, pro-President for Life Constitution. And eventually, of course, they created a constitution that is aimed to promote love, because it's the only, our constitution is the only constitution in the world that has love in the text. That is a tribute to the People Power Revolution. Kasi we showed love there with each other. And it was a pro-human rights constitution, anti-dictatorship. That's why you have controls against martial law being prolonged. It has to have Congress. You cannot suspend Congress during martial law. And it was a constitution that decentralizes the government. Remember, dictatorship is about one-man rule. All powers of the government emanate from Marcos, which we do not want in a democracy. So you have checks and balances, executive, legislative, and judiciary, and decentralize the powers of the national government to the local governments, which will eventually be fulfilled in the 1992 Local Government Code. So yan ang kagandahan ng ating nangyari sa people power. The decentralization in giving more power to the local governments. Marcos held his inauguration in Malacanang. But this is so tragic. While they were swearing in him as president of his fourth term, noong dawn, Marcos called Senator Paul Lacson. And Senator Paul Lacson was asked by Marcos, what do you think? Should I step down? And Senator Lacson said, I think you should cut and cut cleanly. I think the time has come. And then there was a long pause. And Lacson asked Marcos, are you still there, Mr. President? And Marcos answered, I'm so very, very disappointed. And that was that. While he was being sworn in, they were packing their things. They wanted to move out with the help of the American helicopters to be brought to Clark Field. But the problem is, pagdating lang sa Clark Field, they wanted to be brought to Ilocos. And that's the problem. If he will be brought to Ilocos, then maybe he can inspire another revolution and it would be bloody once again. And so they opted to take him out of the country. They did not bring him to Hawaii, to Poway in Ilocos. They brought him to Hawaii, Guam, and then Hawaii. And so what happened was, people were already going to Malacanang. By the afternoon of the 25th, tinatanggal nila yung mga barbed wire doon and all of that. And eventually, of course, when the news that Marcos had fled, the people went inside Malacanang Palace. Those supporters of Marcos, binabugbog pa yung iba. Sinabi lang, wag yung bubugbugin to. Some people were saving him because, he was a poor abandonado. They called the Marcos loyalists abandonados. Marcos left them. And Marcos, of course, the people went in. People were rejoicing. They claimed the palace once again, but there was also looting, which was sad. So it was not a really perfect, peaceful revolution. But there you go. People were happy to just, 20 years of Marcos rule was over. We won against a great dictator of people saving their country through bayanihan. We won. And the spirit of EDSA tells us that it's not just about politics, it's about our kalooban. Tungkol to sa kalooban natin, sa mga pinakita nating mga katangian ng Pilipino. Pananampalataya, pakikipagkapwa, pakikiramay, pagiging masiyahin, bayanihan, pagiging mapayapa, at pagiging malikhain. Isang template na pinakita natin sa buong mundo. Pinagbunyi tayo ng mundo, ginaya tayo ng buong mundo, naging inspirasyon tayo ng South Africa sa pagpapabagsak ng apartheid, ng Czech Republic sa pagpapabagsak sa mga sa diktadura. Oh. Kahit sa Germany, sa unification ng Germany at pagbagsak ng Berlin Wall, pagbagsak ng Soviet Union, ng pagbabalik ng demokrasya sa South Korea. Oh. Maraming bansa ang kumuha ng template ng quote-unquote peaceful revolution at nagawa nila ang pagbabago. So, yan ang panata ng kabataan ngayon. We'll carry on the fight. At doon pinakita talaga natin yung pag-ibig. Yung sundalo na inaakala mong papatay sa'yo, hindi mo dinuraan, hindi mo sinaktan, hindi mo binastos. Yung sundalo na yun, binigyan mo ng bulaklak, niyakap mo at sinabi mo, pare, bakit tayo magpapatay at pare-pareho tayo mga Pilipino? Yan sana yung maalala natin sa diwa ng EDSA. Hindi yung katoksikan, hindi yung cancel culture, kundi yung pakinggan mo ang kapwa mo, makipagkapwa-tao ka, umibig ka sa kapwa mo. Yan talagang diwa ng EDSA na nakakalimutan natin. Dahil ang EDSA ay patuloy na ginagamit sa politika. Wala tayong magagawa, political event yan eh. Pero kung nakita lang sana natin yung kalooban na ipinakita natin doon, mas pahahalagahan natin ito. Kakantahin ko ang isang awitin na kinatahan nung panahon ng Amerikano batay sa isang tula ng isang general ng revolusyon na si Jose Alejandrino. At ang lyrics nito ay ginawa ni Jose Corazon de Jesus at ang musika nito ay ginawa ni Constancio de Guzman. Ito ay pinagbawal na kanta nung martial law. Pinagbawal ito, pero nung ito'y narinig ng isang opisyal ni Marcos na kinanta ni Freddy Aguilar, ang nangyari ay binigyan niya ng special, permission na i-record itong kantang ito dahil napakaganda. Na yun ay isang pagkakamali nila sapagkat dahil doon bumagsak, isa sa mga kantang nagpabagsak sa rehimeng Marcos ay ang awiting Bayan mo. Pinagbawal nila, pero nung pinayagan nila, ito'y nagamit ng mga Pilipino. Ito ang tunay na awitin ng EDSA. At nais kong kantahin sa inyo. Dahil ang dami kong kilala na mga kabataan na hindi na alam ang kantang ito. Ito ang nag-encapsulate ng damdamin ng mga lumaban para sa demokrasya. Ang bayan kong Pilipinas, lupain ng ginto't bulaklak, pag-ibig ang sa kanyang palad, nag-alay ng ganda't dilag. At sa kanyang yumi at ganda, dayuhan ay nahalina. Bayan po, binihag ka, nasadlak sa dusa. Ibon mang may layang lumipad, kulungin mo at umiiyak. Bayan pa kayang sakdal dilag, ang di magnasang makaalpas. Pilipinas kong minumutya, ugad ng luha ko't dalita. Aking adhika, makita kang sakdalaya. Bagamat may nagsasabi na nasayang lamang ang ating laban, dahil ang demokrasyang ating ibinalik ay ginamit sa pansariling interes ng iilan lamang, may mga bagay tayong dapat ipagpasalamat dahil sa EDSA. Una, ang desentralisasyon ng pamahalaan, ng pakikinabang ng lokal na pamahalaan sa biyaya ng pamahalaan. Number 2, ang pagbabalik ng demokratikong institusyon at ng kalayaan sa pananalita at ekspresyon ng sarili. Na hindi na lang isang tao ang nagdidirect sa'yo kung anong papanoorin mo sa TV. Alam nyo ba na ang internet ay naisilang dahil noong 1986 na itayo ang isang IT committee, Presidential Information Technology Committee, na eventually yan ang nagpasimula ng internet sa Pilipinas noong 1995. Sina William Torres yan. So walang internet kung hindi nangyaring EDSA dito sa Pilipinas. Dahil ang mga diktador ayaw nilang connectivity. Gayon din, ang volunteerismo ay lumakas. Dahil kate, kung volunteer ka ng NGO, ikaw ay mare-red tag, komunista ka. Hulihin ka, patayin ka. Pero after EDSA Revolution, nagkaroon ng NGOs, nag-rise ang NGOs at ang civil society, na nagbigay ng tumulong at nag-empower. Maganda yung empower. Hindi mo lang tinutulungan ng mga tao. Tinutulungan mo sila para tulungan ng kanilang sarili. Ang interfaith dialogue ay lumaganap din sa panahon matapos ang EDSA. Maraming biyaya na pwede tayong bilangin. Pero kung hindi man tayo naatim doon sa mga sinasabi nating pangako ng EDSA na akala natin pag nawala ang diktadura at ay balik ang demokrasya, di ginhawa, kailangan din natin tanungin, saan ba tayo nagkamali? Saan tayo nagkulang? Pero isa lang ang masasabi ko. Sabi ni human rights violation victim, napatay po siya, isang kabataan, mula sa Ateneo na ang pangalan ay Ferdi Arceo. Sumulat siya sa kanyang mga magulang. Bago siya mamatay at sinabi niya, Haring naway magtagpo tayong muli sa isang panahong walang kalupitan. Tayo po ay magdiwang. Sapagkat bagamat meron pa rin kalupitan, malaya nating na ipapahayag ang sarili natin at nakakapagkwentuhan tayo tungkol sa mga bagay na ito. Dahil sa mga sakripisyo ng mga katulad niyang kabataan at mga bayani na nag-alay ng kanilang buhay sa isang revolusyon, hindi mapayapa, kundi tigib ng sakripisyo at hindi isang picnic. Dahil hindi parang bayabas ang kalayaan na pwede mong pitasin. Ito'y pinaghihirapan at dahil pinaghirapan, ito ay dapat nating ingatan. Marami pong salamat at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Professor Xiao Chua. Let's all give
Thank you po.
Professor Xiao a big round of applause. Thank you so much. And I am sure the rest of the community would like to engage in discussion after they have listened to your lecture. I now invite Sir John Anthony Salgoso to moderate our discussion.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Angela. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Professor. So if you have any questions concerning this lecture, please feel free to write these down in the chat box, or I'm also looking into the Facebook live stream in the school's official Facebook page. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment there. Okay. To start things off, I do have one question for Professor Chua. Sir, if had the military junta been successful without Cory's support, what would have been the situation of the country today?
Well, I really do not know. That's I'm not into what ifs and hindsight. Uh, well, we just hope that if the junta actually won, if the coup actually won, that they will not be there too long. The problem was, if the junta doesn't trust the will of the people, then it would be like the style in Myanmar, where the junta became so powerful after the death of Aung San, diba? And even if Suu Kyi was freed and was elected in the free elections, she was still controlled by the military junta. And the military have an institution of brotherhood in many ways that can be strong. That if they're going to not use it well, there will be problem. But I will tell you something, and this is something about the military. There are times that I do not agree with their stance on a lot of things. But I have to say that I do not want this to become an anti-military thing. I wanted to believe that our soldiers, especially the ones on the ground, are professionals. Ako po ay sumasaludo sa lahat ng mga kawal, lalo na sa mga maliliit na kawal na lumalaban para sa ating demokrasya at para sa ating bayan at para mapanatili tayong safe. I would like to remind everyone that the Code of Ethics of the Armed Forces of the Philippines actually recognizes and resolves to correct misdeeds of some of its members who sacrificed national interest for individual gains, committed graft and corruption, perpetuated the ill effects of martial law. And these misdeeds tainted the good image of the organization. Therefore, the AFP, recognizing these shortcomings and misdeeds, vow to evoke from its members the will to put the interest of the country and the service above self, to enhance solidarity, to promote professionalism, and to inculcate vigilance and preparedness against all threats to the Republic. I would like to think that the foot soldiers of our Republic are our defenders of human rights, not aggressors. And hopefully those who, all institutions have bad eggs. That's the problem. Even among us who are fighters of human rights, they can have wrong decisions. But I hope that the code of conduct and ethics of the AFP will guide everyone as to the true job of our soldiers is to defend the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your very comprehensive response. I think we have one question here from a student, I think. Is there a rule that we shouldn't mention and support Marcos ever again?
There should be a rule. I do not know. The problem is, if the people would still like a Marcos, although I am comfortable with it, the problem is we are in a democracy. If we believe in the tenets of democracy and he wins in a legitimate election, then I cannot do anything about it. I'm sorry to say. In a democracy, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And you have to accept that. So I will not bar Marcos's, I would not want them to go around being powerful again without recognizing the wrong that their father and mother did to the country. But in a democracy, we have to respect the will of the people. That's why, I tell you something. Let's be frank about this. There were calls for Mocha Uson to be blocked in Facebook. Now, this is the problem. I do not like what she's saying. But I do not want her to be blocked. I will call out if she's saying something wrong. But to block her, how different have we become from the people that we hate if we block her, if we censor her? That's the problem. Now, if you're a real defender of democracy, then you shouldn't be going around saying you should block everyone. You're not the only right person here. In a democracy, you respect other opinions as well. What we want to promote, ladies and gentlemen, and what we're trying to do here now is to create centrist discussions, not radical left or radical right. Not so pro-Duterte, not so anti-Duterte, not so pro-Marcos, not so anti-Marcos. But what I wanted to do is, for real history na mapag-usapan, kailangan talaga nag-uusap tayo ng maayos. At hindi tayo sobrang radical. Because when you push yourself to the radical extreme of each spectrum, what will happen to us is what happened in America. Yan ang nangyari sa Amerika ngayon. They were deeply divided because they pushed themselves too much. The left pushed the progressive lefts pushed themselves to the left too much, that they seem they're not respecting the conservatives, and the conservatives shifted to the right, to racism, to whatever. And so now you have an America that is divided. In a way, pag ganun na tayo. But I hope that we can still encourage that DDS and Dilawan should have a meaningful conversations. Blocking each other will not solve this. In fact, we have to, even if you don't really engage with them, let them see your posts. Diba? Diba? Kasi kapag binlock mo na sila, hindi na nila makikita yung post. Who will talk sense to them if you think that they're not senseful? Although, I do not really... The one thing that we should do if we want meaningful conversation is to stop telling people that we do not believe with, that they're stupid. There's reason why they believe such things. And we should understand why. And only when we understand the other side, pakikipagkapwa-tao, kasi yun ang nawala ng abuses of martial law. Yung pakikipagkapwa-tao, magaling si Marcos, madami siyang infra. At ang infra ay kailangan ng bayan. Infrastructure moves our economy. But the problem again, ladies and gentlemen, is that nawala yung pakikipagkapwa-tao because the abuses were perpetrated and pinabayaan, impunity. Lumakas yung impunity. And so, what we want to do here is makipagkapwa-tao ka. Understand why people say that. Why people support Duterte. And maybe you will learn what narratives when new narratives we can present them to say that human rights and democracy is not just about politics. Human rights and democracy should lead to better lives of the people. Kaginhawaan. Kaginhawaan. Thank you.
Sir, thank you so much. I think we have two questions here which are quite related to each other. First, why are there so many Marcos apologists compared to Suharto apologists? And since both of them were the same in their flaws and in their works, quote unquote, but there's no giant group of Suharto apologists around today. And to follow up that question, what was the main difference of how Marcos left and how Suharto left?
Oh, I'm really not an expert on Indonesia. I think you should ask Ferdinand Victoria that, and he's in Facebook. But why are there so many Marcos apologists than Suharto apologists? I think, again, I am only assuming because I'm not an Indonesian expert. Remember how Indonesian democracy really, rolled. Meaning after Suharto, kasi I was already alive when Suharto fell down. I think in 98, if I'm not mistaken, 98 or 99. And what happened was, they really tried their best to have the democratic institutions work. So, how do you say that the democratic institutions work? Peaceful transition of power. Pag natalo ka, bababa ka. Kapag nanalo ka, aangat ka, di ba? There were a series of leaders. And although some of the leaders were not as good, there were leaders who were good. When you have good leaders, after people power, for example, after the fall of Suharto, then people would say, at least the dictatorship was not as effective as the new leader. But the problem is, there is a misconception that all the leaders after EDSA were ineffective. Either they're clean but inefficient, or they're so good administratively or management-wise, but they're corrupt. Ganun lang yung parang pinagpipilian mo. So people said, this democracy is not working. Pero again, democracy is really, you have to make it more perfect. There's no perfect democracy. when you say more perfect, meaning you have to make it more, you have to make it better. I think that's a better term for it. No? Although that's a formal term, to make a more perfect union, to make a more perfect democracy. But just make it better. How do you make it better? Maybe education. Maybe is the. But why is there people are educated who are not pro-democracy? you do not know. It's really our experience with our leaders and government that animates what we think of EDSA. And so because of what happened after 35 years, that it was not really a very, very joyful ride. It was imperfect. People said that maybe we need another strongman. Or maybe we should continue strongman rule. Yun yung problem. You cannot blame people for that. And so, all you have to do is we have to, at sana makaselect tayo, makapili tayo ng bagong pinuno na magaling na, hindi pa magnanakaw. Saan tayo hahanap nun? Diba? It's choosing between the devil and the deep blue sea. That's the big problem. So, yung mga mabubuting tao dapat tumakbo.
Thank you, sir. There's a follow-up question again to that. There was a question here. What about the comparison of Marcos to Lee Kuan Yew daw, the Singaporean leader?
Lee Kuan Yew himself, in his memoirs, and I read it, said that Marcos was corrupted. No? Lee Kuan Yew yan. Parang sinasabi niya na masyadong nagnakaw itong taong ito. Kaya ang Pilipinas ay nayari. I forgot the exact words. It's in the internet. You find it. Lee Kuan Yew and Marcos. So yun ang makikita mo doon. Even Lee Kuan Yew, he's a dictator, mahigpit yan. He did not like dissent. But kahit siya, naloka kay Marcos when it comes to corruption. So imagine that it says something, by the way. And the Guinness Book of Records in the 1980s announced that the $10 billion that was lost in the Philippine government from Marcos and his cronies was the biggest robbery in the world. The Guinness World Records.
Sir, in connection to that, sir, may we know about your thoughts or stand on Bongbong Marcos's plan to run for the 2022 election again, considering the official announcement from his camp recently?
Well, the problem was he had become too silent for so long. He was not part of the limelight. So I do not know if he have a chance. I'm sorry to say. Maybe for senator again or vice president, but I don't think the presidency is for him. In 2016, malakas siya. But I don't know kung malakas pa siya. Ang malakas ngayon, Duterte. But, the problem is, we cannot really predict because the dark horse always comes. Kasi lahat na naging past presidents natin in the past, maybe 10 years, 15 years, they were unexpected people. So, it was unexpected. Duterte himself was unexpected. Those who said that they're going to run or those who they groomed who will run, ang nangyayari kasi dyan, hinahanapan na ng butas ng putik at black propaganda comes in. So, yun. And na-unravel. Kung masama naman talaga siya, kung corrupt naman talaga siya, talagang nabubuo. So, yun. Kaya nga, Sara Duterte is not saying she's running for president because she doesn't want to be the target. But the problem is, all people who said that they're not going to run, eventually run. So, lahat. Actually, lahat. Diosdado Macapagal, Cory Aquino, even Gloria. I think si Joseph Estrada lang yung solid na nagplano talagang maging presidente na eventually naging presidente. Manny Villar talaga, niyari din yan. Si Binay, niyari din yan. Di ba? All of them na naghanda. So, yun, lahat ng mga nagsabi na hindi sila tatakbo, eventually tumakbo.
Sir, a question from a student, I think. Recently, accounts online have painted the EDSA revolution as the biggest mistake that our country has made. So, what's your take on this matter, sir?
Well, obviously, that's not my take. And that I think that's I explained in the whole lecture. Okay, I do not have to repeat what I said, but basically it was not a mistake because, again, a lot of those who say that it was a mistake were part of it. Diba? We're part of it. You're all part of it. And yeah, maybe you have realizations about what happened after. But ang ihiwalay na lang natin. I mean, yes, there is a cause and effect to everything. But hindi naman lahat ng masamang nangyari sa atin can be directly attributed because of people power. Yung ginagawa niyong dahilan yung people power na naging dahilan ng lahat ng problema natin, that's all politics. There is no one-to-one correlation. Oh? May mga ibang bagay na nangyari, kaya nangyayari ito. And what EDSA revolution is it's a consequential event in our history. Oh? Na again, I like it. Obvious naman na I'm a fan of EDSA people power revolution. But I do not want to say that it was a perfect thing. If there are lessons to be learned, then so be it. If there are things we were not able to accomplish, let's be honest about it. It was a good thing, but we have to learn lessons from it, whether favorable or not.
Thank you for that, sir. In connection to that, sir, there's a follow-up question. So, how can we combat historical revisionism in the negative sense now that the social media can easily be weaponized?
Well, yeah, that's the problem. Algorithms also is a big problem because it creates bubbles of truths. So nagkagiging kanya-kanya yung truth, and people are not having different opinions and a variety of opinions because when you look at your phone, it's customized to suit what you think. And you're not given an alternative explanation of things because kung sino lahat yung kaibigan mo, you band together, di ba? Birds of the same feather of the same birds. And so, when that happens, you're in a bubble where you just believe what you want to believe.
Thank you for that, sir. So, we have, I think, last two questions.
Yes.
First one, can you discuss the relevance of EDSA in today's national situation and the role of the youth in that narrative?
The role of the youth was already spelled out in the lecture. You can
Yeah.
go back to it. When I talked about Lian Alejandro, Chito Gascon, and the Ateneans down from the hill. What's the message? Is basically that the young people have a contribution to EDSA and therefore will have a contribution on any national endeavor, including the betterment of our country. That's one. You have to believe it. But, I will not tell you how to do it because each one of us will make a way to do it based on how our talents, our capabilities. Batay lahat yan sa kung ano yung kaya mong gawin. Ano ba yung talent mo? Magaling ka ba sa layout ng magazine? Magaling ka ba mag-edit ng video? Di gamitin mo. Ang dami-daming nag-i-edit ng video, ginagamit yung talent nila sa katarantaduhan. I'm sorry for the French, but I just have to say that. Even if you're at Ateneo de Iloilo, Santa Maria Catholic School, I'm sorry. But I have to say that this is what's happening. People are using their talents to divide this nation. We should not divide this nation. We should unite the nation. How? By not canceling each other and using our talents so that we further understand our kapwa. So this is what is happening to me now. I'm trying to understand why Marcos loyalists are Marcos loyalists. I will not totally attack their narrative. There is a reason why they're like that. But I hope that they will do the same with me. And when we can respect each other's narratives, which are based on truth and evidence, diba? Not willful disinformation and misinformation, then we're in the right path. But the problem is we use our talents to misinform, disinform. For the sake of likes, views, monetization. We put all this catchy, you know, um, catchy, shall we say, captions and clickbaits, diba? So that was that. Well, I'm sorry for the one because I'm shouting, You should never invite Xiao Chua if you do not want a passionate discussion. I'm joking, of course. I'm very sorry if your ears were sensitive. I will
Thank
try
you.
to be more prudent.
Thank you for that, sir. For that passionate response. Okay. I think we have one last question, which I think is best, which will best encapsulate this session. A symposium like this is being criticized by some as a leftist activity or an anti-government action, or is being unfair to Ferdinand Marcos, who contributed a lot to this country. What are your thoughts about this view, sir?
Well, the problem is, just look at me. Do I look like a communist? I am too fat to become a communist. I consume a lot of food. By the way, I'm wearing yellow, so I'm not red. I mean, of course, I'm joking, but you know what I mean. This is a Catholic school, although there were people in the Catholic Church who believe in liberation theology. I don't think that, this is the problem. If you want to create a common enemy for easy messaging and narrative building, you say everyone who's Duterte's nemesis are leftists. Now, I do not agree with that. That's detrimental to democracy. We should celebrate our differences. We should make available as many ideologies as possible for the people to be able to choose. We should talk about the gains and the gains and the of these ideologies. If you're going to look at it, my title was about the Marcos dictatorship's end, so I have to talk about all these things. But if you're going to invite me about Imelda's governance of Metro Manila, maybe you will hear a different Xiao Chua, who recognizes the projects of Imelda, although also looks at what went wrong. So what I'm telling you here is that, then it's so easy to build simplistic narratives of enemies of the state, leftist and all of that, and red tagging and all of that. When the beauty, ang kagandahan ng edukasyon ay dapat mas maraming mga kung ano-anong ideya ang ating mabasa. 'Di ba? Hindi ka kasi ang problema when you tag someone as red or communist agad and you say it's bad. I'm not saying that I believe in communism. I don't. But you should read it. Maybe you will not agree with it, but maybe there are good points that you can get, especially with the preferential option for the poor. Diba? Because, we do not want unbridled capitalism. Because capitalism has been abusive also. Akala nung iba, pag capitalist ka, masipag ka, magiging mayayaman ka. Hindi ito matotoo yun eh. We need the balance. Kaya nga ako, I advocate centrism. Huwag tayong magpakahon. Socialism in the sense of the democratic socialism or social democracy, maybe. Kaso ako, hindi naman ako makakahon dun eh. I also invoke Bonifacio, who is not a communist. He's a nationalist. Diba? Huwag kayong magpakahon. Be multiple. Have principles, of course. Your core is your Christians. I'm a Christian, you're a Catholic. Yan ang core natin. Diba? Pero, huwag tayong maging sarado isip. Recognize Marcos for the good things that his administration initiated. Sure. I did that with my thesis on Imelda. But when something is wrong, call it out. I'm not totally anti-Duterte, as you see. I like build, build, build very much. But I do not agree with the toxic rhetoric that divides the country and the human rights record. But there are some things that he's doing good. So, ganun lang yun. Be balanced. I'm not saying don't have balls. I'm just saying don't be too radical that you move away people from you. So instead of building conversations, remember that nation building is about nation building. It's not nation dividing. You don't build a country by dividing it. I'm sorry, I shouted again. You don't build a nation by dividing it. You build it by connecting people, by trying to make people talk about things, even if they don't agree with each other. I implore you, stop being toxic in social media. Try to build conversations. Stop name calling people you don't agree with. Don't call them stupid. Stop using harsh language. Build conversations, even if with people you do not agree with. And when they see that you are sincere in building these conversations, we will have, thesis, antithesis, right? And then you have synthesis. We cannot be thinking alike. Thinking differently and putting those solutions together make things work and become better. Because if we do not have oppositions, we will be mediocre. So this is my message for everyone on both sides. Accept that we are different, but let us always talk.
Thank you very much, sir, for that wonderful synthesis at the end of the discussion. So I'm going to refer us everyone back to Ma'am Angela to formally end our session.
Thank you
Sir,
so
thank you
much.
so much.
Mabuhay.
We sincerely thank everyone for sharing your thoughts and participating actively in our discussion. So we also thank Sir Tony for moderating, and we sincerely thank Professor Xiao Chua for being very passionate in discussing the history of the Filipino people to our young people. Now, to give us his closing message, let us warmly welcome our school president, Reverend Father Joseph Raymond Patrick Sanchez of the Society of Jesus.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Ateneo de Iloilo Santa Maria Catholic School, I would like to thank Mr. Xiao Chua for taking us down memory lane once more, for walking us through the key moments in our journey towards the recovery and restoration of democracy in our country through the EDSA revolution. No? And I think the key word here is memory. No? Memory, it's for us to be mindful once more and to remember. And in remembering, we remember, we make it a part of us again. We make the spirit of EDSA a part of our being once again. And this exercise of remembering and commemorating becomes especially crucial now that we are preparing to choose our political leaders once again in May next year. And also with the many issues that face us, the pandemic, the push for constitutional change, political dynasty, and the politicization of many social issues, I think we are called once again to be actively engaged in the affairs of our society. And with this, I would like to issue to our senior high school students and to our faculty as well, that you will take the lead in deciding to engage the election process next year by first register to be able to vote and to actually vote. And while waiting for the elections, I hope we will do our part in educating and informing our fellow Filipinos as to the issues of the day and to make sure that we choose wisely people who will work for justice in society and uphold the common good. And I would like to also thank all those who have organized this forum, the Social Studies Program, our Christian Living Education Program, and the Humanities and Ignatian Spirituality and Languages cluster of our senior high school. With that, mabuhay ang katarungan, mabuhay ang sambayanang Pilipino, mabuhay ang Pilipinas.
Thank you so much, Father Rains. And with that, we gladly end our online symposium this afternoon with our school.
Opo, salamat po.
Father,
Alright.
thank you po. Thank you.
God bless us all.
Congratulations, Social Studies,
Bye, Father. Bye, Prof.
and
Thank
Skill
you.
Group.
Bye-bye.
Thank you also.
Thanks for attending, everyone.
Ulitin na.
Congrats! Congratulations!
All of us.
As usual, excellent. Excellent sharing, Professor. Thank you.